Bonjour, mes amis. Welcome back. It's Christina, the manager of the Pacific Beach Library. Today is our continued read-along together of the Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. Let's see. Today is our 32nd day of reading together, and we're going to be reading chapters 54 and 55. But before we do that, let's have a little bit of tea to start off our day. Today I'm having some of the loose leaf Earl Grey de la Creme. So it's the loose leaf Earl Grey tea that also has a little bit of vanilla and cornflower and sunflower. It's just really a beautiful tea and it tastes delicious. Oh, hey Pam, good to see you. Let's see. Ooh, this is actually one of my favorites. I like Earl Greys. I was talking with some friends. I'm in a tea group also, and we were trying to figure out if it would be possible to do a Earl Grey themed tea party where we have different varieties of Earl Grey, maybe an Earl Grey ice cream. We were actually thinking maybe an Earl Grey ice cream, and I was thinking even waffles, and if you could have Earl Grey ice cream sandwiches. I don't know. I like Earl Grey. That's delicious. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about yesterday's chapter. Yesterday we just read one chapter, chapter 53. It was called Robert le Diable, and in that one, the Count of Monte Cristo goes to the opera with Haydée once again. But before we actually see the Count of Monte Cristo, of course everyone is talking about him, as they tend to do in this book. There is a box where Albert de Morcerf and his friend Chateau Renaud are invited to go speak with the Baroness Danglars and her daughter, and Lucien Debray, who is a friend of Albert de Morcerf, who we met earlier, and who also is acquainted with Madame Danglars, and they acknowledge in the book, which I thought was kind of interesting. I think the hint was dropped, but I wasn't quite certain. So yeah, I guess, let's see, Lucien Debray is the admitted lover of Madame Danglars, so okay, I didn't quite get that. Ooh, yes, I've had Earl Grey or shortbread. Sorry, I just saw Adrienne's comment. I've had Earl Grey shortbread, but waffles, I think that does sound delightful too. Okay, sorry, that was an Earl Grey offshoot. Sorry about that. One of these days, though, maybe we should have an Earl Grey day and just have a bunch of different varieties. I think that'd be fun. Okay, so they were talking with Albert de Morcerf, and Chateau Renaud were talking with the Danglars, Madame and her daughter Mademoiselle Eugenie, who is loosely, unofficially engaged to marry Albert de Morcerf. Neither of them are really interested, quite honestly, but their parents seem to have made the match, and so it's probably going to happen. Albert de Morcerf also talks with the Countess G. They don't say her whole name, they just say G with a little line after it. And we had previously met her when Albert and Franz d'Epinay were over in Rome for the carnival. And at that time they had teased that they thought the Count of Monte Cristo seemed rather mysterious and so pale with the dark hair, and so maybe he was like a vampire of some sort. And so it's interesting, when he is in Paris, she sees his horse win a race. She doesn't know that the horse belongs to the Count of Monte Cristo. It's some mysterious person who has, won this race with a horse named Vampa, very like Luigi Vampa, the bandit who had abducted Albert de Morcerf. And she finds that the prize is given to her, the prize cup, one for the horse race, is given to her, signed by Lord Ruthven. And I had to look that up too. Lord Ruthven is a famous vampire from a first appearing in print in 1819 in John William Polidori's The Vampire. And so he was making reference to her teasing about him being a vampire. So that was actually rather cute. Afterwards, though, the Baroness Danglars asks Albert to bring the Count of Monte Cristo up to see her in her box at the opera, because after he arrives with Haydée, everyone is just amazed and talking about them and whisper, whisper, whisper. And so she gets them to come up to visit her. And afterwards, though, while they're talking with Madame Danglars, the Count of Morcerf, Albert's father, shows up as well. And when he does, the Comte de Morcerf arrives also in the box, and they're talking to each other, and Haydée looks up from where she was seated, and she sees, because she's looking for the Count of Monte Cristo, who is her friend and benefactor, and when she sees him, she sees next to him the Count of Morcerf, Albert's father, formerly known as Fernand, and when she sees him, she's shocked. She cries out and she falls back in her seat. And when Monte Cristo says, he kind of makes his excuses like, I have to go back to my box, my guest is not doing well, she has delicate nerves. And he goes down to see her, and she says, who was that you were just talking to? And it's like, well, the Count of Morcerf. He tells me that he knew your father, that he served with him. And she basically says, he sold my father to the Turks, and that the money he has now was the money he got for selling my father out. And so the Count of Monte Cristo is like, well, maybe you can tell me more about this story, about his treachery. So we know that Idea is going to tell him more about what happened there. And so the plot continues to thicken. We are learning more and more about Monte Cristo and his associates, the people who did him wrong so many years before, and pretty sure he's going to get his revenge on him somehow in the next few chapters. So he is still setting the scene, planting the seeds that will end up becoming his crop of vengeance. Today we'll read 2 chapters together, chapters 54 and 55. Chapter 54 is called A Flurry in Stocks. Some days after this meeting, Albert de Morcerf visited the Count of Monte Cristo at his home in the Champs-Élysées, which had already assumed that palace-like appearance which the Count's princely fortune enabled him to give even to his most temporary residences. He came to renew the thanks of Madame Danglars, which had been already conveyed to the Count through the medium of a letter signed Baronne Danglars, née Hermine de Servieux. Albert was accompanied by Lucien Debray, who, joining in his friend's conversation, added some passing compliments, the source of which the Count's talent for finesse easily enabled him to guess. He was convinced that Lucien's visit was due to a double feeling of curiosity, the larger half of which sentiment emanated from the Rue de la Chaussée d'Antin. In short, Madame Danglars, not being able personally to examine in detail the domestic economy and household arrangements of a man who gave away horses worth 30,000 francs, and who went to the opera with a Greek slave wearing diamonds to the amount of 1,000,000 of money, had deputed those eyes, by which she was accustomed to see, to give her a faithful account of the mode of life of this incomprehensible person. But the Count did not appear to suspect that there could be the slightest connection between Lucien's visit and the curiosity of the Baroness. You are in constant communication with the Baron Danglars? The Count inquired of Albert de Morcerf. Yes, Count. You know what I told you. All remains the same, then, in that quarter? It is more than ever a settled thing, said Lucien, and considering that this remark was all that he was at that time called upon to make, he adjusted the glass to his eye, and biting the top of his gold-headed cane, began to make the tour of the apartment, examining the arms and the pictures. Ah, said Monte Cristo, I did not expect that the affair would be so promptly concluded. Oh, things take their course without our assistance. While we are forgetting them, they are falling into their appointed order, and when, again, our attention is directed to them, we are surprised at the progress they have made towards the proposed end. My father and Monsieur Danglars served together in Spain. My father in the army, and Monsieur Danglars in the commissariat department. It was there that my father, ruined by the Revolution, and Monsieur Danglars, who never had possessed any patrimony, both laid the foundations of their different fortunes. Yes, said Monte Cristo, I think Monsieur Danglars mentioned that at a visit which I paid him. And, continued he, casting a side glance at Lucien, who was turning over the leaves of an album, Mademoiselle Eugenie is pretty. I think I remember that to be her name. Very pretty, or rather very beautiful, replied Albert, but of that style of beauty which I do not appreciate. I am an ungrateful fellow. You speak as if you were already her husband. Ah, returned Albert, in his turn looking round to see what Lucien was doing. Really, said Monte Cristo, lowering his voice, you do not appear to me to be very enthusiastic on the subject of this marriage. Mademoiselle Danglars is too rich for me, replied Morcerf, and that frightens me. Bah! Exclaimed Monte Cristo, that's a fine reason to give. Are you not rich yourself? My father's income is about 50,000 francs per annum, and he will give me perhaps 10 or 12,000 when I marry. That perhaps might not be considered a large sum, in Paris especially, said the Count, but everything does not depend on wealth, and it is a fine thing to have a good name, and to occupy a high station in society. Your name is celebrated, your position magnificent, and then the Comte de Morcerf is a soldier, and it is pleasing to see the integrity of a Bayard united to the poverty of a Duguesclin. Disinterestedness is the brightest ray in which a noble sword can shine. As for me, I consider the union with Mademoiselle Danglars a most suitable one. She will enrich you, and you will ennoble her. Albert shook his head and looked thoughtful. There is still something else, said he. I confess, observed Monte Cristo, that I have some difficulty in comprehending your objection to a young lady who is both rich and beautiful. Oh, said Morcerf, this repugnance, if repugnance it may be called, is not all on my side. Whence can it arise, then? For you told me your father desired the marriage. It is my mother who dissents. She has a clear and penetrating judgment, and does not smile on the proposed union. I cannot account for it, but she seems to entertain some prejudice against the Danglars. Ah, said the Count, in a somewhat forced tone, that may be easily explained. The Comtesse de Morcerf, who is aristocracy and refinement itself, does not relish the idea of being allied by your marriage with one of ignoble birth. That is natural enough. I do not know if that is her reason, said Albert, but one thing I do know, that if this marriage be consummated, it will render her quite miserable. There was to have been a meeting 6 weeks ago in order to talk over and settle the affair, but I had such a sudden attack of indisposition. Real? Interrupted the Count, smiling. Oh, real enough, from anxiety doubtless. At any rate, they postponed the matter for 2 months. There is no hurry, you know. I am not yet 21, and Eugenie is only 17, but the 2 months expire next week. It must be done. My dear Count, you cannot imagine how my mind is harassed. How happy you are in being exempt from all this. Well, and why should not you be free too? What prevents you from being so? Oh, it will be too great a disappointment to my father if I do not marry Mademoiselle Danglars. Marry her, then, said the Count, with a significant shrug of the shoulders. Yes, replied Morcerf, but that will plunge my mother into positive grief. Then do not marry her, said the Count. Well, I shall see. I will try and think over what is the best thing to be done. You will give me your advice, will you not? And if possible, extricate me from my unpleasant position? I think, rather than give pain to my dear mother, I would run the risk of offending the Count. Monte Cristo turned away. He seemed moved by this last remark. Ah, said he to Debray, who had thrown himself into an easy chair at the farthest extremity of the salon, and who held a pencil in his right hand and an account book in his left. What are you doing there? Are you making a sketch after Poussin? Oh, no, was the tranquil response. I am too fond of art to attempt anything of that sort. I am doing a little sum in arithmetic. In arithmetic? Yes, I am calculating. By the way, Morcerf, that indirectly concerns you. I am calculating what the house of Danglars must have gained by the last rise in Haiti bonds. From 206 they have risen to 409 in 3 days, and the prudent banker had purchased at 206. Therefore, he must have made 300,000 livres. That is not his biggest scoop, said Morcerf. Did he not make 1,000,000 in Spaniards this year? My dear fellow, said Lucien, here is the Count of Monte Cristo, who will say to you, as the Italians do, denaro e santità, meta della meta. When they tell me such things, I only shrug my shoulders and say nothing. But you were speaking of Haitians, said Monte Cristo. Ah, Haitians. That is quite another thing. Haitians are the écartés of French stock jobbing. We may like bouillotte, delight in whist, be enraptured with Boston, and yet grow tired of them all, but we always come back to écarté. It is not only a game, it is an hors d'oeuvre. Monsieur Danglars sold yesterday at 405 and pockets 300,000 francs. Had he but waited till today, the price would have fallen to 205, and instead of gaining 300,000 francs, he would have lost 20 or 25,000. And what has caused the sudden fall from 409 to 206? Asked Monte Cristo. I am profoundly ignorant of all these stock-jobbing intrigues. Because, said Albert, laughing, One piece of news follows another, and there is often great dissimilarity between them. Ah, said the Count, I see that Monsieur Danglars is accustomed to play at gaining or losing 300,000 francs in a day. He must be enormously rich. It is not he who plays, exclaimed Lucien. It is Madame Danglars. She is indeed daring. But you, who are a reasonable being, Lucien, and who knows how little dependence is to be placed on the news, since you are at the fountainhead, surely you ought to prevent it, said Morcerf with a smile. How can I, if her husband fails in controlling her? Asked Lucien. You know the character of the Baroness. No one has any influence with her, and she does precisely what she pleases. Ah, if I were in your place, said Albert. Well, I would reform her. It would be rendering a service to her future son-in-law. How would you set about it? Ah, that would be easy enough. I would give her a lesson. A lesson? Yes. Your position as secretary to the minister renders your authority great on the subject of political news. You never open your mouth, but the stockbrokers immediately stenograph your words. Cause her to lose 100,000 francs, and that would teach her prudence. I do not understand, stammered Lucien. It is very clear, notwithstanding, replied the young man, with an artlessness wholly free from affectation. Tell her some fine morning an unheard-of piece of intelligence, some telegraphic dispatch of which you alone are in possession. For instance, that Henri IV was seen yesterday at Gabriel's. That would boom the market. She will buy heavily, and she will certainly lose when Beauchamp announces the following day, in his gazette, the report circulated by some usually well-informed persons that the king was seen yesterday at Gabriel's house is totally without foundation. We can positively assert that his Majesty did not quit the Pont Neuf. Lucien half smiled. Monte Cristo, although apparently indifferent, had not lost one word of this conversation, and his penetrating eye had even read a hidden secret in the embarrassed manner of the secretary. This embarrassment had completely escaped Albert, but it caused Lucien to shorten his visit. He was evidently ill at ease. The Count, in taking leave of him, said something in a low voice, to which he replied, Willingly, Count, I accept. The Count returned to young Morcerf. Do you not think, on reflection, said he to him, that you have done wrong in thus speaking of your mother-in-law in the presence of Monsieur Debray? My dear Count, said Morcerf, I beg of you not to apply that title so prematurely. Now, speaking without any exaggeration, is your mother really so very much adverse to this marriage? So much so that the Baroness very rarely comes to the house, and my mother has not, I think, visited Madame Danglars twice in her whole life. Then, said the Count, I am emboldened to speak openly to you. Monsieur Danglars is my banker. Monsieur de Villefort has overwhelmed me with politeness in return for a service which a casual piece of good fortune enabled me to render him. I predict from all this an avalanche of dinners and routs. Now, in order not to presume on this, and also to be beforehand with them, I have, if agreeable to you, thought of inviting Monsieur and Madame Danglars and Monsieur and Madame de Villefort to my country house at Auteuil. If I were to invite you and the Count and Countess of Morcerf to this dinner, I should give it the appearance of being a matrimonial meeting, or at least Madame de Morcerf would look upon the affair in that light, especially if Baron Danglars did me the honor to bring his daughter. In that case, your mother would hold me in aversion, and I do not at all wish that. On the contrary, I desire to stand high in her esteem. Indeed, Count, said Morcerf, I thank you sincerely for having used so much candor towards me, and I gratefully accept the exclusion we propose. You say you desire my mother's good opinion? I assure you it is already yours to a very unusual extent. Do you think so? Said Monte Cristo, with interest. Oh, I am sure of it. We talked of you an hour after you left us the other day. But to return to what we were saying, if my mother could know of this attention on your part, and I will venture to tell her, I am sure that she will be most grateful to you. It is true that my father will be equally angry. The Count laughed. Well, said he to Morcerf, but I think your father will not be the only angry one. Monsieur and Madame Danglars will think me a very ill-mannered person. They know that I am intimate with you, that you are in fact one of the oldest of my Parisian acquaintances, and they will not find you at my house. They will certainly ask me why I did not invite you. Be sure to provide yourself with some previous engagement which shall have a semblance of probability, and communicate the fact to me by a line in writing. You know that with bankers nothing but a written document will be valid. I will do better than that, said Albert. My mother is wishing to go to the seaside. What day is fixed for your dinner? Saturday. This is Tuesday. Well, tomorrow evening we leave, and the day after we shall be at Tréport. Really, Count, you have a delightful way of setting people at their ease. Indeed, you give me more credit than I deserve. I only wish to do what will be agreeable to you. That is all. When shall you send your invitations? This very day. Well, I will immediately call on Monsieur Danglars and tell him that my mother and myself must leave Paris tomorrow. I have not seen you, consequently I know nothing of your dinner. How foolish you are! Have you forgotten that Monsieur Debray has just seen you at my house? Ah, true. Fix it this way. I have seen you and invited you without any ceremony when you instantly answered that it would be impossible for you to accept, as you were going to Tréport. Well then, that is settled. But you will come and call on my mother before tomorrow? Before tomorrow? That will be a difficult matter to arrange. Besides, I shall just be in the way of all the preparations for departure. Well, you can do better. You were only a charming man before, but if you accede to my proposal, you will be adorable. What must I do to attain such sublimity? You are today free as air. Come and dine with me. We shall be a small party, only yourself, my mother, and I. You have scarcely seen my mother. You shall have an opportunity of observing her more closely. She is a remarkable woman, and I only regret that there does not exist another like her, about 20 years younger. In that case, I assure you, there would very soon be a countess and viscountess of Morcerf. As to my father, you will not see him. He is officially engaged and dines with the chief referendary. We will talk over our travels, and you, who have seen the whole world, will relate your adventures. You shall tell us the history of the beautiful Greek who was with you the other night at the opera, and whom you call your slave, and yet treat like a princess. We will talk Italian and Spanish. Come, accept my invitation, and my mother will thank you. 1,000 thanks, said the Count. Your invitation is most gracious, and I regret exceedingly that it is not in my power to accept it. I am not so much at liberty as you suppose. On the contrary, I have a most important engagement. Ah, take care. You were teaching me just now how, in case of an invitation to dinner, one might credibly make an excuse. I require the proof of a pre-engagement. I am not a banker like Monsieur Danglars, but I am quite as incredulous as he is. I am going to give you a proof, replied the Count, and he rang the bell. Humph, said Morcerf. This is the second time you have refused to dine with my mother. It is evident that you wish to avoid her. Monte Cristo started. Oh, you do not mean that, said he. Besides, here comes the confirmation of my assertion. Baptistine entered and remained standing at the door. I had no previous knowledge of your visit, had I? Indeed, you are such an extraordinary person that I would not answer for it. At all events, I could not guess that you would invite me to dinner. Probably not. Well, listen. Baptistine, what did I tell you this morning when I called you into my laboratory? To close the door against visitors as soon as the clock struck 5, replied the valet. What then? Ah, my dear Count, said Albert. No, I wish to do away with that mysterious reputation that you have given me, my dear Viscount. It is tiresome to be always acting Manfred. I wish my life to be free and open. Go on, Baptistine. Then to admit no one except Major Bartolomeo Cavalcanti and his son. You hear? Major Bartolomeo Cavalcanti, a man who ranks amongst the most ancient nobility of Italy, whose name Dante has celebrated in the 10th canto of the Inferno. You remember it, do you not? Then there is his son, Andrea, a charming young man, about your own age, Viscount, bearing the same title as yourself, and who is making his entry into the Parisian world, aided by his father's millions. The Major will bring his son with him this evening. The Contino, as we say in Italy, he confides him to my care. If he proves himself worthy of it, I will do what I can to advance his interests. You will assist me in the work, will you not? Most undoubtedly. This Major Cavalcanti is an old friend of yours, then? By no means. He is a perfect nobleman, very polite, modest, and agreeable, such as may be found constantly in Italy, descendants of very ancient families. I have met him several times at Florence, Bologna, and Lucca, and he has now communicated to me the fact of his arrival in Paris. The acquaintances one makes in traveling have a sort of claim on one. They everywhere expect to receive the same attention which you once paid them by chance, as though the civilities of a passing hour were likely to awaken any lasting interest in favor of the man in whose society you may happen to be thrown in the course of your journey. This good Major Cavalcanti is come to take a second view of Paris, which he only saw in passing through in the time of the Empire, when he was on his way to Moscow. I shall give him a good dinner. He will confide his son to my care. I will promise to watch over him. I shall let him follow in whatever path his folly may lead him, and then I shall have done my part. Certainly. I see you are a model mentor, said Albert. Goodbye. We shall return by Sunday. By the by, I have received news of Franz. Have you? Is he still amusing himself in Italy? I believe so. However, he regrets your absence extremely. He says you were the son of Rome, and that without you all appears dark and cloudy. I do not know if he does not go so far as to say that it rains. His opinion of me is altered for the better, then? No, he still persists in looking upon you as the most incomprehensible and mysterious of beings. He is a charming young man, said Monte Cristo, and I felt a lively interest in him the very first evening of my introduction, when I met him in search of a supper and prevailed upon him to accept a portion of mine. He is, I think, the son of General d'Epinay? He is. The same who was so shamefully assassinated in 1815 by the Bonapartists? Yes. Really, I like him extremely. Is there not also a matrimonial engagement contemplated for him? Yes. He is to marry Mademoiselle de Villefort. Indeed. And you know I am to marry Mademoiselle Danglars, said Albert, laughing. You smile. Yes. Why do you do so? I smile, because there appears to me to be about as much inclination for the consummation of the engagement in question as there is for my own. But really, my dear Count, we are talking as much of women as they do of us. It is unpardonable. Albert rose. Are you going? Really, that is a good idea. 2 hours have I been boring you to death with my company, and then you, with the greatest politeness, ask me if I am going. Indeed, Count, you are the most polished man in the world, and your servants, too, how very well behaved they are. There is quite a style about them. Monsieur Baptistine especially, I could never get such a man as that. My servants seem to imitate those you sometimes see in a play, who, because they have only a word or two to say, acquit themselves in the most awkward manner possible. Therefore, if you part with Monsieur Baptistine, give me the refusal of him. By all means. That is not all. Give my compliments to your illustrious Lucanese, Cavalcante of the Cavalcanti, and if by any chance he should be wishing to establish his son, find him a wife very rich, very noble on her mother's side at least, and a baroness in right of her father. I will help you in the search. Ha ha! You will do as much as that, will you? Yes. Well, really, nothing is certain in this world. Oh, Count, what a service you might render me! I should like you 100 times better if, by your intervention, I could manage to remain a bachelor, even were it only for 10 years. Nothing is impossible, gravely replied Monte Cristo, and taking leave of Albert, he returned into the house and struck the gong 3 times. Bertuccio appeared. Monsieur Bertuccio, you understand that I intend entertaining company on Saturday at Auteuil. Bertuccio slightly started. I shall require your services to see that all be properly arranged. It is a beautiful house, or at all events may be made so. There must be a good deal done before it can deserve that title, Your Excellency, for the tapestried hangings are very old. Let them all be taken away and changed then, with the exception of the sleeping chamber, which is hung with red damask. You will leave that exactly as it is." Bertuccio bowed. "You will not touch the garden either. As to the yard, you may do what you please with it. I should prefer that being altered beyond all recognition." "I will do everything in my power to carry out your wishes, Your Excellency. I should be glad, however, to receive Your Excellency's commands concerning the dinner." "Really, my dear Monsieur Bertuccio," said the Count, "since you have been in Paris, you have become quite nervous, and apparently out of your element. You no longer seem to understand me. But surely Your Excellency will be so good as to inform me whom you are expecting to receive." "I do not yet know myself. Neither is it necessary that you should do so. Lucilius dines with Lucilius. That is quite sufficient." Bertuccio bowed and left the room. And now, chapter 55, Major Cavalcanti. Both the Count and Baptistine had told the truth when they announced to Morcerf the proposed visit of the Major, which had served Monte Cristo as a pretext for declining Albert's invitation. 7 o'clock had just struck, and Monsieur Bertuccio, according to the command which had just been given him, had 2 hours before left for Auteuil, when a cab stopped at the door, and after depositing its occupant at the gate, immediately hurried away, as if ashamed of its employment. The visitor was about 52 years of age, dressed in one of the green surtouts ornamented with black frogs, which have so long maintained their popularity all over Europe. He wore trousers of blue cloth, boots tolerably clean, but not of the brightest polish, and a little too thick in the soles, buckskin gloves, a hat somewhat resembling in shape those usually worn by the gendarme, and a black cravat striped with white, which, if the proprietor had not worn it of his own free will, might have passed for a halter, so much did it resemble one. Such was the picturesque costume of the person who rang at the gate, and demanded if it was not at number 30 in the Avenue des Champs-Élysées that the Count of Monte Cristo lived, and who, being answered by the porter in the affirmative, entered, closed the gate after him, and began to ascend the steps. The small and angular head of this man, his white hair and thick gray mustaches, caused him to be easily recognized by Baptistine, who had received an exact description of the expected visitor and who was awaiting him in the hall. Therefore, scarcely had the stranger time to pronounce his name before the Count was apprised of his arrival. He was ushered into a simple and elegant drawing-room, and the Count rose to meet him with a smiling air. "Ah, my dear sir, you are most welcome. I was expecting you." "Indeed," said the Italian. "Was your Excellency then aware of my visit?" "Yes. I had been told that I should see you today at 7 o'clock. "Then you have received full information concerning my arrival?" "Of course." "Ah, so much the better. I feared this little precaution might have been forgotten." "What precaution?" "That of informing you beforehand of my coming." "Oh, no, it is not." "But you are sure you are not mistaken?" "Very sure." "It really was I whom your Excellency expected at 7 o'clock this evening?" "I will prove it to you beyond a doubt." "Oh, no, never mind that," said the Italian. "It is not worth the trouble." "Yes, yes," said Monte Cristo. His visitor appeared slightly uneasy. "Let me see," said the Count. "Are you not the Marquis Bartolomeo Cavalcanti?" "Bartolomeo Cavalcanti," joyfully replied the Italian. "Yes, I am really he." "Ex-major in the Austrian service?" "Was I a major?" timidly asked the old soldier. "Yes," said Monte Cristo. "You were a major. That is the title the French give to the post which you filled in Italy." "Very good," said the major. "I do not demand more, you understand." "Your visit here today is not of your own suggestion, is it?" said Monte Cristo. "No, certainly not." "You were sent by some other person?" "Yes." "By the excellent Abbé Busoni?" "Exactly so," said the delighted major. "And you have a letter?" "Yes, there it is." "Give it to me, then." And Monte Cristo took the letter, which he opened and read. The major looked at the Count with his large, staring eyes, and then took a survey of the apartment, but his gaze almost immediately reverted to the proprietor of the room. "Yes, yes, I see. Major Cavalcanti, a worthy patriarch of Lucca, a descendant of the Cavalcanti of Florence, continued Monte Cristo, reading aloud, possessing an income of 500,000. Monte Cristo raised his eyes from the paper and bowed. 500,000, said he. Magnificent. 500,000, is it? Said the major. Yes, in so many words, and it must be so, for the abbé knows correctly the amount of all the largest fortunes in Europe. Be it 500,000 then, but on my word of honor, I had no idea that it was so much. Because you are robbed by your steward. You must make some reformation in that quarter. You have opened my eyes, said the Italian gravely. I will show the gentleman the door. Monte Cristo resumed the perusal of the letter. And who only needs one thing more to make him happy. Yes, indeed, but one, said the major with a sigh, which is to recover a lost and adored son. A lost and adored son, stolen away in his infancy either by an enemy of his noble family or by the gypsies. At the age of 5 years, said the major with a deep sigh, and raising his eye to heaven. Unhappy father, said Monte Cristo. The count continued. I have given him renewed life and hope in the assurance that you have the power of restoring the son whom he has vainly sought for 15 years. The major looked at the count with an indescribable expression of anxiety. I have the power of so doing, said Monte Cristo. The major recovered his self-possession. So then, said he, the letter was true to the end? Did you doubt it, my dear Monsieur Bartolomeo? No, indeed, certainly not. A good man, a man holding religious office, as does the Abbé Busoni, could not condescend to deceive or play off a joke. But your Excellency has not read all. Ah, true, said Monte Cristo. There is a postscript. Yes, yes, repeated the major. Yes, there is a postscript. In order to save Major Cavalcanti the trouble of drawing on his banker, I send him a draft for 2,000 francs to defray his traveling expenses, and credit on you for the further sum of 48,000 francs, which you still owe me. The major awaited the conclusion of the postscript, apparently with great anxiety. Very good, said the count. He said, very good, muttered the major. Then, sir, replied he. Then what? Asked Monte Cristo. Then the postscript... Well, what of the postscript? Then the postscript is as favorably received by you as the rest of the letter? Certainly. The Abbé Busoni and myself have a small account open between us. I do not remember if it is exactly 48,000 francs, which I am still owing him, but I dare say we shall not dispute the difference. You attach great importance, then, to this postscript, my dear Monsieur Cavalcanti? I must explain to you, said the major, that, fully confiding in the signature of the Abbé Busoni, I had not provided myself with any other funds, so that if this resource had failed me, I should have found myself very unpleasantly situated in Paris. Is it possible that a man of your standing should be embarrassed anywhere? Said Monte Cristo. Why, really, I know no one, said the major. But then you yourself are known to others? Yes, I am known, so that... Proceed, my dear Monsieur Cavalcanti. So that you will remit to me these 48,000 francs? Certainly, at your first request. The major's eyes dilated with pleasing astonishment. But sit down, said Monte Cristo. Really, I do not know what I have been thinking of. I have positively kept you standing for the last quarter of an hour. Don't mention it. The major drew an armchair towards him and proceeded to seat himself. Now, said the count, what will you take? A glass of sherry, port, or Alicante? Alicante, if you please. It is my favorite wine. I have some that is very good. You will take a biscuit with it, will you not? Yes, I will take a biscuit, as you are so obliging. Monte Cristo rang. Baptistine appeared. The count advanced to meet him. Well, said he in a low voice. The young man is here, said the valet de chambre in the same tone. In what room did you take him? Into the blue drawing-room, according to your Excellency's orders. That's right. Now bring the Alicante and some biscuits." Baptistine left the room. "Really," said the Major, "I am quite ashamed of the trouble I am giving you." "Pray don't mention such a thing," said the Count. Baptistine re-entered with glasses, wine, and biscuits. The Count filled one glass, but in the other he only poured a few drops of the ruby-colored liquid. The bottle was covered with spiders' webs, and all the other signs which indicate the age of wine more truly than do wrinkles on a man's face. The Major made a wise choice. He took the full glass and a biscuit. The Count told Baptistine to leave the plate within reach of his guest, who began by sipping the Alicante with an expression of great satisfaction, and then delicately steeped his biscuit in the wine. "So, sir, you lived at Lucca, did you? You were rich, noble, held in great esteem, had all that could render a man happy?" "All," said the Major, hastily swallowing his biscuit. "Positively all." "And yet there was one thing wanting in order to complete your happiness?" "Only one thing," said the Italian. "And that one thing, your lost child." "Ah," said the Major, taking a second biscuit, "that consummation of my happiness was indeed wanting." The worthy Major raised his eyes to heaven and sighed. "Let me hear, then," said the Count, "who this deeply regretted son was, for I always understood you were a bachelor." "That was the general opinion, sir," said the Major, "and I—" "Yes," replied the Count, "and you confirmed the report. A youthful indiscretion, I suppose, which you were anxious to conceal from the world at large?" The Major recovered himself and resumed his usual calm manner, at the same time casting his eyes down, either to give himself time to compose his countenance or to assist his imagination, all the while giving an under-look at the Count, the protracted smile on whose lips still announced the same polite curiosity. "Yes," said the Major, "I did wish this fault to be hidden from every eye." "Not on your own account, surely," replied Monte Cristo, "for a man is above that sort of thing." "Oh, no, certainly not on my own account," said the Major, with a smile and a shake of the head. "But for the sake of the mother?" said the Count. "Yes, for the mother's sake. His poor mother!" cried the Major, taking a third biscuit. "And take some more wine, my dear Cavalcanti," said the Count, pouring out for him a second glass of Alicante. "Your emotion has quite overcome you." "His poor mother!" murmured the Major, trying to get the lachrymal gland in operation so as to moisten the corner of his eye with a false tear. "She belonged to one of the first families in Italy, I think, did she not?" "She was of a noble family of Fiesole, Count." "And her name was—" "Do you desire to know her name?" "Oh," said Monte Cristo, "it would be quite superfluous for you to tell me, for I already know it." "The Count knows everything," said the Italian, bowing. "Oliva Corsinari, was it not?" "Oliva Corsinari." "A marchioness?" "A marchioness." "And you married her at last, notwithstanding the opposition of her family?" "Yes, that was the way it ended." "And you have doubtless brought all your papers with you?" said Monte Cristo. "What papers?" "The certificate of your marriage with Olivia Corsinari, and the register of your child's birth?" "The register of my child's birth?" "The register of the birth of Andrea Cavalcanti, of your son. Is not his name Andrea?" "I believe so," said the Major. "What? You believe so?" "I dare not positively assert it, as he has been lost for so long a time." "Well then," said Monte Cristo, "you have all the documents with you?" "Your Excellency, I regret to say that, not knowing it was necessary to come provided with these papers, I neglected to bring them." "That is unfortunate," returned Monte Cristo. "Were they, then, so necessary?" "They were indispensable." The Major passed his hand across his brow. "Ah, perbaccio, indispensable, were they?" "Certainly they were. Supposing that there were to be doubts raised as to the validity Certainly they were. Supposing there were to be doubts raised as to the validity of your marriage or the legitimacy of your child?" "True," said the Major. "There might be doubts raised." In that case, your son would be very unpleasantly situated. It would be fatal to his interests. It might cause him to fail in some desirable matrimonial alliance. Oh, peccato. You must know that in France, they are very particular on these points. It is not sufficient, as in Italy, to go to the priest and say, "We love each other and want you to marry us." Marriage is a civil affair in France, and in order to marry in an orthodox manner, you must have papers which undeniably establish your identity. Ah, that is the misfortune. You see, I have not these necessary papers. Fortunately, I have them, though, said Monte Cristo. You? Yes. You have them. I have them. Ah, indeed, said the Major, who, seeing the object of his journey frustrated by the absence of the papers, feared also that his forgetfulness might give rise to some difficulty concerning the 48,000 francs. Ah, indeed, that is a fortunate circumstance. Yes, that really is lucky, for it never occurred to me to bring them. I do not at all wonder at it. One cannot think of everything, but happily the Abbé Busoni thought for you. He is an excellent person. He is extremely prudent and thoughtful. He is an admirable man, said the Major. And he sent them to you? Here they are. The Major clasped his hands in token of admiration. You married Oliva Corsinari in the church of San Paolo de Montecatini. Here is the priest's certificate. Yes, indeed. There it is truly, said the Italian, looking on with astonishment. And here is Andrea Cavalcanti's baptismal register, given by the curé of Saravezza. All quite correct. Take these documents, then. They do not concern me. You'll give them to your son, who will, of course, take great care of them. I should think so, indeed. If he were to lose them... Well, and if he were to lose them, said Monte Cristo. In that case, replied the Major, it would be necessary to write to the curé for duplicates, and it would be some time before they could be obtained. It would be a difficult matter to arrange, said Monte Cristo. Almost an impossibility, replied the Major. I am very glad to see that you understand the value of these papers. I regard them as invaluable. Now, said Monte Cristo, as to the mother of the young man. As to the mother of the young man, repeated the Italian with anxiety. As regards the Marchesa Corsinari. Really, said the Major, difficulties seem to thicken upon us. Will she be wanted in any way? No, sir, replied Monte Cristo. Besides, has she not... Yes, sir, said the Major, she has... Paid the last debt of nature? Ah, alas, yes, returned the Italian. I knew that, said Monte Cristo. She has been dead these 10 years. And I am still mourning her loss, exclaimed the Major, drawing from his pocket a checked handkerchief and alternately wiping first the left and then the right eye. What would you have? Said Monte Cristo. We are all mortal. Now you understand, my dear Monsieur Cavalcanti, that it is useless for you to tell people in France that you have been separated from your son for 15 years. Stories of gypsies who steal children are not at all in vogue in this part of the world, and would not be believed. You sent him for his education to a college in one of the provinces, and now you wish him to complete his education in the Parisian world. That is the reason which has induced you to leave Viareggio, where you have lived since the death of your wife. That will be sufficient. You think so? Certainly. Very well, then. If they should hear of the separation... Ah, yes. What could I say? That an unfaithful tutor, brought over by the enemies of your family, by the Corsinari? Precisely. Had stolen away this child in order that your name might become extinct. That is reasonable, since he is an only son. Well, now that all is arranged, do not let these newly awakened remembrances be forgotten. You have doubtless already guessed that I am preparing a surprise for you. An agreeable one? Asked the Italian. Ah, I see the eye of a father is no more to be deceived than his heart. Said the Major. Someone has told you the secret Or perhaps you guessed that he was here. That who was here? Your child, your son, your Andrea. I did guess it, replied the Major with the greatest possible coolness. Then he is here? He is, said Monte Cristo. When the valet de chambre came in just now, he told me of his arrival. Ah, very well, said the Major, clutching the buttons of his coat at each exclamation. My dear sir, said Monte Cristo, I understand your emotion. You must have time to recover yourself. I will, in the meantime, go and prepare the young man for this much-desired interview, for I presume that he is not less impatient for it than yourself. I should quite imagine that to be the case, said Cavalcanti. Well, in a quarter of an hour he shall be with you. You will bring him, then? You carry your goodness so far as even to present him to me yourself? No, I do not wish to come between a father and son. Your interview will be private, but do not be uneasy. Even if the powerful voice of nature should be silent, you cannot well mistake him. He will enter by this door. He is a fine young man, of fair complexion, a little too fair perhaps, pleasing in manners, but you will see and judge for yourself. By the way, said the Major, you know I have only the 2,000 francs which the Abbé Busoni sent me. This sum I have expended upon traveling expenses and you want money. That is a matter of course, my dear Monsieur Cavalcanti. Well, here are 8,000 francs on account. The Major's eyes sparkled brilliantly. It is 40,000 francs which I now owe you, said Monte Cristo. Does your Excellency wish for a receipt? Said the Major, at the same time slipping the money into the inner pocket of his coat. For what? Said the Count. I thought you might want it to show the Abbé Busoni. Well, when you receive the remaining 40,000, you shall give me a receipt in full. Between honest men, such excessive precaution is, I think, quite unnecessary. Yes, so it is, between perfectly upright people. One word more, said Monte Cristo. Say on. You will permit me to make one remark? Certainly, pray do so. Then I should advise you to leave off wearing that style of dress. Indeed, said the Major, regarding himself with an air of complete satisfaction. Yes, it may be worn at Via Reggio, but that costume, however elegant in itself, has long been out of fashion in Paris. That's unfortunate. Oh, if you really are attached to your old mode of dress, you can easily resume it when you leave Paris. But what shall I wear? What you find in your trunks. In my trunks? I have but one portmanteau. I dare say you have nothing else with you. What is the use of boring oneself with so many things? Besides, an old soldier always likes to march with as little baggage as possible. That is just the case. Precisely so. But you are a man of foresight and prudence. Therefore you sent your luggage on before you. It has arrived at the Hôtel des Princes, Rue de Richelieu. It is there you are to take up your quarters. Then, in these trunks, I presume you have given orders to your valet de chambre to put in all that you are likely to need, your plain clothes and your uniform. On grand occasions, you must wear your uniform. That will look very well. And do not forget your crosses. They still laugh at them in France, and yet always wear them, for all that. Very well, said the Major, who was in ecstasy at the attention paid him by the Count. Now, said Monte Cristo, that you have fortified yourself against all painful excitement, prepare yourself, my dear Monsieur Cavalcanti, to meet your lost Andrea. Saying which, Monte Cristo bowed and disappeared behind the tapestry, leaving the Major fascinated beyond expression with the delightful reception which he had received at the hands of the Count. Whew, and so that's our first meeting with Major Cavalcanti. He seemed a little surprised by the things that the Count of Monte Cristo was discussing with him. We'll learn more about him and his son, Andrea Cavalcanti, in tomorrow's reading. So thank you very much for joining me today. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Hope you have a great rest of your day. And I'll see you for more Count of Monte Cristo tomorrow. Bye! Oops.